if people.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. And if people pop on, that is perfectly fine. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for signing in to class. We're going to keep this right at an hour. Today we're really going to talk about the contract to close period of a transaction. And I recognize lots of you guys from taking classes before. So if you have heard this spiel before, hopefully I'll have a couple new tidbits. But you know, really this information is good to hear over and over again. And lots of us, you know, we get so excited when we have a new buyer that we're working with, or we have a new listing and we work to get them under contract. And then we realize the beef of a transaction comes from when we get them under contract to when we close the contract. So today we're really just going to focus on lots of strategies, tips, things to think about, things we can do to create a smooth and seamless and stress-free, which stress-free and contract to close might be a little bit of a contradiction, but we are going to make it as stress-free as possible. And I think that the contract to close period is really where I earn my money as a realtor, and also the time that I show my clients why they should use me again, why they should refer me out. So let's go ahead and get started. As always, if you have questions or comments or stories or anything you want to share, I would love for everyone to share. You can just interrupt me, or you can type a question in the chat box, but I'll try to have a couple breaks where we can stop and tell stories or ask questions if we need to do that. But feel free to jump in if you have a question or comment. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen with you. Okay, so, and I know you're supposed to press the PowerPoint play button so you can see one page at a time, but I like it like this so I can see what's coming up next. So forgive me if that is troublesome to you, but I like it looking like this, and we still have the same information. All right, so contract to close period, like I said, is the time from when we get a house under contract until it actually gets to the closing table. And lots of us have many stories we could tell of things that have gone wrong in the contract to close period, or you know, things that have killed a transaction and we were at contract but we never made it to close. So we're just going to talk today about strategies to kind of see some issues that might pop up before they are a problem, so we know how to work around those things. Now, again, this PowerPoint presentation needs a little refreshing because I initially did this last year. So this next slide was more true last year than it is right now in this current market. But you know, in the past couple years, if you have been the listing agent, you are just golden. You put your, you know, house on the market, you write up a little description, take your pictures, and then buyers agents just flock in and do the work for you. You don't have to have open houses. You don't have to do price reductions. But like I mentioned, things in the past couple months are shifting a little bit. So I need to update this PowerPoint presentation, but sometimes, you know, the listing agent can feel just cool, calm, and collected, and a buyer's agent, by the time they are under contract, maybe has written 10, 15, 20 offers for a buyer before they get accepted. So sometimes they look a little rough around the edges and tired, but you know, listing agents can also feel that way. So just a little picture to put in perspective, you know, how we feel sometimes as an agent, or what we think we look like as an agent versus how we really feel. I know I have felt like both of those Barbies in transactions before, on the listing and on the buyer's agent side. So let's start with buyer's agent's responsibilities. When you are a buyer's agent, you have the bulk of the responsibilities in the contract to close period. And again, today we're really focusing on contract to close. So I know listing agents have a ton of work to do before the house ever gets listed, all the pre-listing stuff. But when we are under contract, the buyer's agent really has the bulk of the actual responsibilities. So you need to communicate with your lender. This obviously should be done before you go under contract. You want to make sure that you know your buyer's lender, have their pre-approval letter, know if there are any special circumstances. Before I write a contract or an offer for buyers, I always touch base with the lender just to make sure the time period that I'm going to ask for closing or my due diligence period is workable for them. If I put that we only want a 10-day due diligence period, but my lender says it's going to be at least 14 days before the appraisal gets ordered and the appraisal gets back, that's a problem. So you always want to touch base with the lender before you write that offer, just to say, can I ask for a 21-day due diligence period and a 30-day close? Is that going to be a problem? And sometimes it's not lender specific, sometimes it's buyer specific. So, the same lender who could close a loan for one buyer in 21 days might need 30 days for another buyer, just simply because the 21-day buyer had already turned in all their paperwork, tax returns, were not only pre-qualified, but also pre-approved, like they had done all their back work, whereas a buyer who had just gotten pre-qualified might not have done those steps. So please always communicate with your lender before you write an offer. But then, of course, once you are under contract, you need to get that the contract to them ASAP. You need to make sure you have their contact information so you can send it right over to them. As we know, a lot of the things that are done under contract are lender ordered or lender specified. So getting that contract to them the second you go under contract is very important. You're going to need to set up a closing attorney. Most of us, since Lantern does not hold earnest money, and more firms do not hold earnest money or have a trust account, it's very common that you use your closing attorney for the escrow agent in the offer. So you might know which closing attorney you are going to use, but once you have an executed contract, you need to touch base with that attorney again, get them the contract, and then also schedule a closing day and its closing time. You want to communicate the closing information to all parties. So as soon as you get the confirmation from the closing attorney, you want to make sure you email your buyers, and you also want to make sure you email or let the listing agent know closing's been scheduled for this day, this time, with this attorney. It's very important to communicate those things as soon as possible. Once you are a little bit further into the contract period, you are going to set up inspections. Well, again, we're going to set those up as soon as possible, but once the inspection is done, you're going to negotiate repairs or credits. A lot of agents find this part of the transaction to be very, very stressful. It's personally not my favorite thing to do either, when you have to negotiate repairs on either side, when you're a buyer and you're asking for things, or when you're the listing agent and you receive things. This can be a very stressful part of the transaction. And we'll talk about in the future, we'll talk about some ways to mitigate that stress, but those are things that you have to do as the buyer's agent. You also need to know, how many and what inspections need to be ordered. So again, this is going to be client specified, but if you have a home that has a well and a septic, maybe a pool, you're going to make sure that you communicate to your buyer, we need inspections for all of these things to do our due diligence. If you want to forego any of those inspections, obviously you're going to get them. We do this anyway, but on the professional services disclosure, you're going to make sure that they waived the opportunity to get that inspection. So, if you have a home with a well and septic and they just want the general home inspection, you have to make sure they waive on that professional services that they did not want a well inspection or a septic inspection, because we don't want 2 or 3 years from now for that buyer to come back and they have discovered that there's a root of a tree growing through their septic system, and they come back and say, I had no idea I was supposed to get a septic inspection done. Why didn't you tell me that? We want to make sure that we are communicating to our buyers all the inspections that they could have done, and that it's in their best interest to have those inspections done. Now, again, they choose not to, that is their right, but we want to make sure we are being forthcoming with the inspections that could and should be done, just to make sure there are no unknown issues. Another important thing that a buyer's agent has to do is stay on top of the lender to make sure the appraisal has been ordered as soon as possible. Appraisals take a little bit longer now than they did a few years ago, just because, you know, I think appraisers are busier and there's just more demand. As of the near past, lots of people were doing refinance on their mortgage. And so appraisers were busy doing that. So it kind of created a situation where if appraisals used to take 5 to 7 days to come back, now they kind of take 7 to 10 or 7 to 12 days to come back. So you really need to check in with the lender and say, has the appraisal been ordered? When is it due back? And just don't assume that they are taking care of those things. 99.9% of the time they are taking care of those things, especially if it is a lender that is, you know, that is great and you trust. But sometimes the lenders, like the Rocket Mortgages of the world and the online lenders that you don't necessarily have a go-to contact person, you really want to just keep your thumb on those transactions to make sure everything is moving along. As a listing agent, there is not much more frustrating to me than when the day before due diligence is over, a buyer's agent calls and says, the inspection's not back or the appraisal's not back, and we need to push back due diligence period. Personally, I have very little patience for that, just because, like I said, I think it's your responsibility to check with your lender before you write a due diligence period. So we need to make sure that we're on top of that lender too. And if there are issues, we need to know about them sooner rather than later. So that was unsolicited, but just my 2 cents. And then also you want to make sure your buyers are aware of the things they should not do while under contract. This is very, very important. And again, this is something we think lenders maybe take the lead on, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes we assume a buyer knows something that they don't know. So, you know, they don't need to open up any credit or close any credit. Sometimes buyers think, well, I'm going to close out this credit card, so I don't have to deal with that. You don't need to make changes to your credit at all when you're under contract, or even before you go under contract. You, of course, don't need to switch employment, even if it's a job, where you were one position and you're at the same position making the same salary. When you switch companies or switch careers or jobs, that can negatively influence your approval status as far as getting a mortgage. You obviously don't want to have big transactions enter your account or big transactions leave your account. So just having that conversation with your buyer is very important. And you don't have to be a bully about it, but you can kind of say in a joking way, don't go out and buy furniture until after you close, or don't go to Home Depot and open up a Home Depot credit card to get your appliances. Like, you just want to make sure that buyers are aware of that, because that can kill a deal quicker than anything else. And it's very frustrating. And 9 times out of 10, the buyer's going to say, I had no idea. I had no idea I couldn't open up a Home Depot credit card, or I had no idea I couldn't deposit $10,000 that I've had in my backyard in a mason jar right before closing. Like, these are things that you just want to make sure they're aware of. And then lastly, you are going to need to get the utility information from the listing agent or the sellers and get that over to your buyers a week or 2 before closing. You don't want to be sitting at the closing table and say to your buyer, well, did you set your power up for today to turn on today? And they say, oh no, I didn't even think about that, or I didn't think about doing that. That's something you want to make sure your buyers have that information, and you need to make sure they know they need to call prior to closing to have that set up, because sellers are going to turn off their service the day of closing. So we want to make sure that your buyers are not going home to their new home and don't have power for a couple of days. All right, as a listing agent, you still do have responsibilities too. You don't get to just sit back and, eat cake while the buyer's agent does everything. You're going to negotiate repairs that are asked for after inspections. That is the biggest stressor as a listing agent when you're under contract. So sellers obviously are can be high stress in this moment. They've put their home on the market. They're in the midst of packing up all their stuff. They most often are buying a home at the same time that they're selling a home. So sellers can be like a little high stress in these moments. So then when a repair request comes in that has 15 things that the buyer wants the seller to fix, sometimes it can just make them go to another place. So we want to make sure we negotiate those repairs. We stay level-headed. We make sure that we, keep our sellers calm and understand this is not a personal attack on them or a personal attack on their home. But that negotiating those repairs is probably the biggest responsibility that you have as the listing agent. You want to make sure this is so important. And I think a lot of people skip this step. And so I really want to stress this. As a listing agent, it is your job to the sellers, which you work for the sellers, to check in with the appraiser and make sure the appraiser knows everything about the home that could add value. You also want to make sure, if there are specific comps that you use to arrive at that value, to make sure the appraiser has those comps. I have dealt with some appraisers who get their toes stepped on a couple, like if you send this over, they don't even respond, or they're like, got it, obviously I saw that. They can be a little temperamental when you do that, but I don't care. I really don't care. My job is to make sure they have that information. I work for my sellers. I am going to do anything I can to make sure that the appraiser sees that value and has the proof to back it up. So then if there is an appraisal issue that comes back, I don't sit there twiddling my thumbs. I can say, I did everything I could do. I sent over all the information. I sent over all the comps we used. I sent over all the areas of added value. And at that point, I was able to actively participate. Whether the appraiser wants to use that or not is on them. But as a listing agent, I've done that step. So I really encourage you to do that. Most of the time you will get the appraiser information through showing time. So the appraiser is going to schedule that appraisal through showing time. And then you just click on their little contact info. And I don't call them and annoy them with calls and text and things like that. But I will send an email and just say, just wanted to send over all the things that got us to this place. And it's just a simple step that a lot of listing agents, I don't think, do, but I personally think it's important. You're going to get a list of utility providers to give to the buyer's agent. I obviously suggest doing this before you even list the home, just for liability. On the liability standpoint, you want to make sure, if they say they have a sewer or city sewer and city water, you want to make sure that they really do. You want to make sure their utility provider is like whoever does that stuff. You don't want them to have a well and a septic and then them tell you they have city sewer and city water when they don't. So I usually ask for utility providers before I even list the home, just as like a checks and balances to make sure, we're all on the same page about the house. Then you're going to make sure that the seller fills out the seller info sheet from the attorney. The closing attorney is going to email you a seller info sheet. And this is super important because the closing attorney is the one who does all the title work. They're the one who does the HOA transfer information. And then most importantly, they are the one who pays off the existing mortgage for your sellers. So if you do not make sure that the sellers have filled out that seller info sheet and get it back to the attorney in a timely manner, then that could cause a delay of closing. Usually to get that mortgage payoff, it has to be the official one, not the one you can just call the mortgage number and get over the phone. It has to be an official payoff. Usually that takes a couple days for the mortgage company to send that to the closing attorney. So the day before closing is not the time for that light bulb to go off and say, oh no, I didn't make sure my seller got their info sheet over to the attorney, because that can delay closing. And then obviously you are going to convey the expectations of how the house should look at closing. This is another one of the things that you think I think agents take for granted, but sellers sometimes do not know. They don't know that they can't leave a mountain of trash by their front porch or by the road for the trash company to pick up 3 days from now. They don't know that they can't leave the garage filled with junk. They don't think it's junk, but it's junk. You know, it's different if you leave a couple cans of paint that you would use in the home or flooring that you would use in the home. But again, usually you touch base with the buyer's agent that those things are being left behind. But the house should be clean. The house should be empty. The house should not be like the utilities should be on up until closing. They can't turn off their power a week before closing just because they've moved out. They need to keep the utilities on until it's actually closed and out of their name. So you want to make sure as a listing agent that you convey those expectations to your sellers. I had just last year, I had some sellers. And again, we had this conversation. I told them how their home should look. And the sellers had moved out. It was the day of closing. I was running over to the house to grab my sign out of the front yard. And there was a pile of trash. Trash day was the next day. There was a pile of trash by the road that was taller than I was. Just junk. Junk, bags of trash. And the trash company would not pick that stuff up. Like you have to call for big trash pickup. So even if trash day was that day, they would not have picked up all that junk just laying beside the mailbox. So I had to call my sellers and I said, what are y'all doing? And they said, well, we're still at work. We're going to leave work in a little bit. And I said, you need to leave work right now. And you need to come and get all this trash because the buyers are not going to close on the property with this trash out front, and this is our responsibility to move it. So they did. One of the sellers had a truck. He came over. I helped them load it up. We all did it. But that is something that you need to make sure your sellers know. They have to leave it clean, clutter-free. They just can't leave their junk behind just because they want to. And then the biggest role as a listing agent, in my opinion, is ensuring that your sellers know that you have their back in getting this deal to the closing table. Sellers are stressed. They are like toddlers who have missed their nap and they are hangry and they are just stressed out. So you have to make sure they know that you're on their side. The goal is to get this to the closing table and that you can handle those things. So you don't want your sellers to think that you don't have a backbone and you're just letting anything the buyers want slide by or you're being mean or all those things. You want to make sure they know you are team seller. You know, I always say whatever my seller's last name is, I say I am team Romesburg. Like I've got your back on this one. And it's really important for sellers, especially, to know that. I did not mention this at the bottom. Lots of y'all have taken my classes before, but I always have a little kind of mission statement for each class. So the mission statement at the bottom is you set the tone in the contract to close process. Clear communication is key. And it doesn't matter if you're the buyer's agent or the listing agent, you can set the tone. And so by that, I mean, you know, if you are communicating promptly, if you are being nice, if you are making sure you're being respectful, that is going to set the tone for the process. I know we've all had transactions where one agent, the other agent, hopefully it's not you, the agent, but the other agent is difficult. They are rude. They are condescending. They are non-responsive. They never answer their phone. They never answer their emails. Like that's a difficult transaction. And so you want to set the tone. You want to make sure you are communicating clearly and promptly. You are being respectful, even in high stress situations. You never want to be disrespectful to your clients or to the people on the other side of the transaction. So I forgot to mention that early, that you set the tone and that clear communication is key. You have to communicate clearly and promptly. All right, before we keep going, let's just take a little break. Does anyone have questions, comments, a story, or anything to share now before we continue? Okay, well then we'll keep going. All right, so now here's the fun part where we talk about potential issues and deal breakers in every transaction. Not every transaction, most transactions have issues that come up in the contract to close process. I've had a couple transactions in my career. I've been doing this about 8 years, but I've had a couple transactions where it has just been smooth, kumbaya, not a single issue. But again, I think I can think of 2 transactions that were like that over the hundreds that worked. So knowing what to look for is important, and knowing how to deal with things. So obviously a buyer's loan status can change, and that means they were pre-approved, they were pre-qualified, they were able to purchase the home when you went under contract, but then something has changed and now they no longer are qualified, they no longer are pre-approved, they are no longer able to purchase the house. This can be very stressful for a seller. Just because it usually comes out of nowhere. They think, but they were pre-approved. What happened? You know, a buyer could lose their job. A buyer, once a lender starts digging in deep into the buyer's qualifications, they could see something that they didn't know before they got them pre-approved. And so lots of things can change. I've personally had to deal with this on a personal residence. The last home that I sold, I think we were like 4 days from closing, and the buyer's loan status changed, and we were supposed to close like 4 days from now, and the buyer's agent called me and said they're no longer qualified. And so I kind of lived out that one. I had lived it out with other people, but living it out personally is a little more challenging. And so, you know, we worked through that, and actually I set them up with another lender, my go-to lender, and she saved the day. She got them requalified and closed. So it worked out, but that's one of the biggest issues that you can deal with being under contract. Appraisal issues, that nobody likes those either. You know, sometimes we think a buyer wants their home not to appraise and wants to get the house for cheaper, but that's not the case. Buyers don't want there to be appraisal issues, and buyers agents especially don't want there to be appraisal issues any more than or less than sellers do. You know, when you go under contract for a set price, that's what everyone feels that it's worth. And so when there is an issue with that, it can cause a lot of stress. So just making sure that, you know, you have clear communication, you are checking it with the lender to make sure it's ordered. So if there is an appraisal issue, you can deal with it in a timely manner. That is helpful. I have dealt with many appraisal issues in the past, and it definitely never gets easier when you have to tell a seller, you know, we were under contract for this price, but it came in at this price. That's a hard conversation to have. But again, when I can come back and say, I made sure I sent over all our comps to the appraiser, I made sure I sent over all the added value areas to the appraiser, I can go into that conversation a little bit more securely and confidently than if I did nothing. And then I say, well, yeah, I don't know if the appraiser, that's a hard word to say, appraiser. I don't know if the appraiser knew that, you know, you had just added that 2,000 or 200 square foot room, or I don't know if the appraiser knew that you had just put a new roof on. I don't know if the appraiser knew that. Like, I know what the appraiser knows because I send them that information. Inspection issues, a big one. You know, a home inspector's job is to find issues with the home. And so even brand new construction, there will be issues that pop up. How severe those issues can vary, and also what the buyer expects to happen from issues can vary. So you need to make sure that you have conversations, both if you're the buyer's agent, you want to have a conversation with your buyer about, you know, reasonable things that pop up that you can ask for. And you also want to make sure you have a conversation, if you're the listing agent, with issues that will pop up on a home inspection, or, you know, don't take it personally when you see this, that, and that on a home inspection, because there's going to be issues regardless. Something that I see sometimes, not just for personal transactions, but just helping some of my Mooresville agents deal with things, I see where buyer's agents a lot of times will ask for Things that were known before they went under contract. So most specifically, like a HVAC system, you know, in the property disclosure, it's going to say the age of the HVAC. So if the HVAC is the year 2000, and right now it's 2022, you know, that system might be towards the end of its life. And so what I see very often is a buyer's agent will write up, and again, it's not the agent's fault, but I think we have to educate our clients. But a buyer will say they want money for the HVAC system to be replaced, or they want something to be done for something that's old. So as a listing agent, I immediately am going to go back and say, you saw the age of that system in the property disclosure. It wasn't like hidden from you that this was a 22-year-old system. And also, you know, if there's an issue with it, that's one thing. But often I see buyer's agents say, you know, there's not a current issue, but there's going to be an issue soon. Well, that does not work. And I don't feel like that's a reasonable request. And so that's where when my buyers start in on things sometimes, like I want to ask for this, I want to ask for that, I always just remind them, if it's something we saw before we went under contract, like if we knew that the floors in the house had to be redone, or we knew that the deck, the front deck, like was missing wood pieces and blah, 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 like I'm going to remind my buyers of those things. I always try to put the hat of the other side on when I'm dealing with my clients. So as a listing agent, when buyer's agents ask for those things, I always kind of, you know, talk to my sellers, but say those issues were known. I feel inspection issues that popped up and are asked for should be things that are unknown at the time of offer. And so just educating our clients can help alleviate some of that stress and make sure everybody's on the same page. Title issues are obviously something that could pop up. Attorneys are the ones who, you know, run the title, do the title search, but they could find things. You know, you have a client, and this is from personal experience. You have a client who tells you they are divorced. I had a client one time, she was on the deed. She was the only one on the deed. And then she got married after she owned the home, which we know now he has to be a seller also. But she said she was divorced and she had switched her name back, and the tax deed didn't have him listed on there. And we had that conversation, and I had an intake form where, you know, list the single, divorced, widowed, whatever you are. And I had the deed to back it up and had the things. I did not ask for her divorce settlement. I kind of, you know, you believe what people tell you. Well, we go under contract, and turns out she was not divorced. She was separated, even though she implicitly told me she was divorced. And so the husband had to sign the paperwork. Well, the husband did not want to sign the paperwork. It was kind of a difficult separation issue. And so he did not want to sign the paperwork. Well, I'm the listing agent. The buyer's agent then says, you know, well, we're going to sue because we're under contract. We want this home. My buyer's going to sue. So at that point, of course, I have to tell my seller, you know, you're about to be sued and they're going to win because you are legally married. Hold on just a second. My son is back there clanging away. Fletcher. You are still legally married and your husband has to sign the paperwork. So long story short, we worked it out. The husband signed. He got some money out of it from his wife, ex-wife, whatever she was. But that's an issue that, you know, the attorney found out when they were doing the title work. They found out that this seller was actually still married, even though she was telling everybody she was divorced. So learn from my mistake on that one. Lender delays is something that could create issues. You know, if a lender says they can get something closed in 30 days, but really, you know, they're delayed and they're delayed and they're delayed, those can cause issues and setbacks. A survey dispute is a big one. Lots of times our buyers don't want to get a survey just because it's an additional amount of money. Lots of times surveyors are backed up, and so they cannot get things done quickly when we're under contract. And so buyers will say, you know, never mind, we just won't get a survey done. Survey disputes can be a really, really big deal. you know, if you're especially in a city environment and something is built within the setbacks of the property, or a fence is on somebody else's lawn, like there can be some big time issues that come from that. And so as a buyer's agent, you always want to encourage a survey to be done. If it's in a neighborhood where the builder had surveys done before, before all the homes were built, and the seller has the survey they can give to you, that's one thing. But if it's just a property that, has buildings on it, or has a fence on it, or has a pool on it, or, there's some gas lines close by and there might be some easements, it's just really beneficial to make sure that you have a survey done so you can deal with disputes if they pop up. And then obviously the home contingency of the buyer. So if you are under contract with a buyer that has a contingency of selling their home, and then something happens to the sale of their home, then they're not qualified to buy your home anymore. That's a conversation before you go under contract. You want to make sure you have with your sellers. If you're the listing agent, say, this is a great offer, but just be aware this offer is contingent on the sale of these buyers' home. And if something falls through, even if it's no fault to these buyers, but if something falls through on the sale of their home, then they may not be able to purchase your home. So I just always like to let my sellers know, and buyers, any issues that could pop up. And then if they do pop up, it's not the first time that they've heard these issues. It's information that they've heard before. So I think that's important, just to make sure you kind of prepare for the worst and then hope for the best. But like this little squirrel right here, you as a buyer's agent or as a listing agent, it's your job to kind of handle things. It's your job to make sure you approach situations calmly, and that you communicate calmly, and that you stay respectful, even in the midst of issues. Like it's not you versus, like if I'm the listing agent, it's not me versus the buyers, or it's not me versus the buyer's agent. We're all working towards the same goal. Everybody's goal in this transaction is to get this to the closing table and get this closed. So you really have to approach things as we're all working together to make the same goal happen. It's not us versus them, or buyer versus seller. Like we're all on the same page here. And sometimes agents can forget that. And I think that can save deals sometimes. When everyone comes from a place of being respectful, it can save a deal that might not be saved in a different situation. All right, so when you are almost at the finish line of a transaction, you want to make sure, if possible, that you end on a positive note. Even if things have been high stress, you want to make sure that, your clients are happy. You want to try to make sure that the other side of the transaction is happy, that when you see the buyer's agent or the listing agent at the closing table, that you can talk to them and, have a positive relationship. No one wants to end a transaction where everyone is mad and angry and doesn't want to be at the attorney at the same time. Like it's very, very important to try to end on a positive note. You also want to make sure that, we've talked about this before, you want to stay on the lender and the attorney to make sure that the timelines are being met as far as closing. So, lenders have to send out the initial closing disclosures 3 days before a buyer can close. You want to make sure that's being done. You want to make sure the attorney has the payoff. If you're the listing agent, make sure they have that seller payoff. Make sure they've received all the HOA transfer information. Make sure they have the preliminary CD done, just so you can verify to make sure everything looks right. It's not a good look when you're sitting at the closing table and you have the closing disclosure in front of you and you say, oh, well, that's wrong. That should be on the other side, or that's a buyer expense. You want to review things before you get to the closing table. And so staying on the attorney and the lender to make sure that they're on top of it helps you walk into the closing table issue free, and you've already checked everything. And paralegals are humans. They make mistakes sometimes, and it's your job to get those mistakes and find them and politely politely is the key word, let them know that that might be in the wrong spot. When the paralegal sends out the closing disclosure, you're not going to just respond back and say, that's on the wrong side. Like, you want to be calm, you want to be nice, and you want to be respectful. That expression of you catch more flies with honey than vinegar is very true in all of life, but I think it's especially true in real estate transactions. And then lastly, this is going to be the last interaction you have with your client on the transaction. So if you want to work with this client again, which honestly, I've ended transactions before where I have thought, I'm okay if you sell your home with another realtor next time, just because they might be a little difficult. But you want to make sure that they end the transaction knowing that you did your best and that you worked hard for them and that you were responsible and respectful and professional. And so that way they'll use you again, or they will refer you out. They'll tell their friends and family how wonderful you were, or they'll tell their friends and family, what a dummy you were, and like you should have used another realtor. So we always want to make sure we end on a positive note. And then again, at the bottom, you set the tone. Clear communication is key. A note that I didn't mention at the beginning, and this is true not just in contract to close. I think this is true when we work with clients in general. But you want to make sure you are communicating to your client in the way that they want to be communicated with, or in the way that is easiest for them. So, some clients want telephone calls. Some clients don't want telephone calls. Some clients, would rather have a text message or an email. It's always important just to ask the person, like, how do you want to communicate? Is it best if I text you? Is it best if I email you? Is it best if I just call you on the phone? Like, what do you prefer? And this you need to do with your clients, but you also need to do with the other side of the transaction too. I don't need a phone call if I'm the listing agent, I don't need a phone call from the buyer's agent to let me know every little step. A phone call to say the inspection's been scheduled, or a phone call to say, we got the appraisal report back. Like, you can send me an email or you can send me a text, and that is perfect for me. It's going to be quicker for me to respond probably, but some people like phone calls. And if you just text them all the time and they're expecting phone calls, then they're going to think negatively about you. So always ask people, how would you like for me to communicate with you? Or what's the easiest way for me to communicate with you? And then go with that, communicate with them in that way. That creates clear communication and effective communication. And then lastly, a transaction coordinator can be a wonderful tool if you struggle with some aspects of like paperwork or scheduling things or making sure you've done all the steps. Transaction coordinators exist, and you can use one to kind of streamline your process. That does not mean if you use a transaction coordinator that you get to check out and just say, my transaction coordinator is going to do everything. Usually they do a lot of paperwork, and they do scheduling, and they do kind of like checks and balances to make sure everything is being done. But they're not going to negotiate repairs. They're not going to, do certain things as an agent you have to do. But if you find that you are not productive or you are not efficient when it comes to certain things, by all means, reach out and hire a transaction coordinator to kind of streamline some of that for you. I firmly believe if you're not an expert on something, you need to find someone who is an expert. So like with home photography as a listing agent or measuring a house, could I do those things? Yes, I could do those things. Am I an expert or a professional in those things? No, I'm not. So I'm going to hire that out. I'm going to hire a professional home photographer. I'm going to hire a measurer to measure the house. I am an expert on transaction coordination. So I'm not going to hire a transaction coordinator because I know what to do. I can do that. I can, I have a process that I can go off of. But if that's something you struggle with, by all means, have someone to help you with that. So one last thing I want to show you. Let me go back and share my screen differently. I want to show you something that has really helped me when it comes to communicating with my clients. Again, I am an over communicator when it comes to certain things, but I, a long time ago, created a contract to close email for buyers and a contract to close email for sellers. And I send out those things to my buyers and sellers as soon as we go under contract. And so let me show you. Oh, hold on just a second. I've lost you. Hold on, guys. So sorry. There we are back again. So let me show you an example of an email that I send as soon as we go under contract for a buyer and as soon as we go under contract for a seller. And I will feel free to email these to anyone who wants to see them when we get done also. So this is a contract to close email that I send out to sellers. And so as soon as I go under contract on a listing, I will copy and paste this. I just have a template saved. I will copy and paste this. And then obviously I have to refresh the names and the dates and the specific things to the email. I have to refresh. But basically I'm going to say, congrats, you're under contract. Congrats, you're under contract. This can be one of the most stressful parts of the home selling process. So here's a list of things that you will need to do as a seller. So obviously I start off with things that the buyer's agent is going to be doing. Just give them a heads up. The buyer's agent's going to do his home inspection. They're going to have their lender schedule the appraisal. They're going to set up the closing with a closing attorney. If it's already set up, I'm going to tell, like in this instance, it's already set up. I know where the closing is going to be. I even know the date and the time when I sent this email out. So I include that in the email. Then I say, these are things that you need to do. You need to compile a list of all your utilities. You need to, and again, this, maybe we've already done this step. You need to complete a seller info sheet for the attorney. You need to pack. Obviously, this one's self-explanatory, I say, but I also say, once we get to the due diligence period, pack little things before we end the due diligence period. But once due diligence period's over, you can really get serious about packing up your house. I also touch base about, the due diligence check, if it's coming in the mail. And then at the bottom, I say, I know this is a lot of info. I'm here for you every step of the way, orchestrate all of this for you. But this just gives sellers an outline of what to expect from when we go under contract to when we close. And then I also have one that is for buyers. So this one, again, congratulations, we're under contract. I highlight the dates. I say the end of the due diligence period is 10/6, closing on 10/17. I let them know the things that we are going to be doing on the buyer side. We're going to get the executed contract to the lender. We're going to get the due diligence and earnest money checks delivered. And I'm going to tell them right here who they need to be made out to. We're going to have home inspection completed. We're going to go through that report, ask the seller if anything needs to be done. We're going to make sure the lender orders the appraisal. Then I'm going to say closer to closing, I'll get you a list of utility companies, get those set up. Down here, it's going to be a whirlwind process. I'm here for you every step of the way. But this just lets my buyers know these are the things that we're going to be doing under the due diligence or under contract period. So these are templates. I just have these, and then I like I said, copy and paste, change names, change dates, change information. But this is good just because then a seller can go back and look at that information if they want to. They can, refer back to it. They don't have to ask me again for something if I've sent it over to them in email. So those 2 templates I send out right away. Like literally the moment we go under contract, I copy and paste that email, change the dates, change the names. I also attach the executed contract just for their records to that, but I send that out right away. And so developing things that can help you streamline your process makes you more efficient as a realtor and makes you be able to serve your clients better. So again, I don't mind sending those out to people, the buyer and seller letters I use. You can always, ship things around. If you want a copy of those, if you'll just send me an email and then I can respond back to you with copies of those letters. Excuse me, just a second. But that is an easy way for us to make sure we're communicating everything to our clients. And it also makes us look like we are professionals and know what we're doing. Okay. Does anyone have any stories to share or questions, comments, bad stories, good stories, anything that could help anyone else? No questions and comments? Okay. Well, as always, I am here to help you if you have issues, or if you just have a question that you want to ask, you can always call or text me. Let me go. Okay, what's my email? Let me go back to the PowerPoint page because it's on the PowerPoint page on the first one. So let me go back to that, share my screen again, and my email is on there. All right, hold on just a second and I'll get that back pulled up for you. Okay, there's my email and there is my cell phone number at the bottom of this. So again, if you shoot me an email, I will respond back and attach copies of that for you if you're interested in that. But again, I think this is so important in life anyway, but you have to set the tone and the mood for what you want. So if you want it to be a stress-free and easy transaction, you need to set that tone. You need to set that mood. And you need to know that that doesn't mean, talking bad about the other side or talking bad about the seller to the buyer or the buyer's agent to your seller. Like, you need to be professional and you need to make sure that you are calm and cool and collected. And oftentimes I see sellers, again, or not sellers, listing agents or buyer's agents that almost overshare with their clients and kind of give their clients a bad taste in their mouth about the other side. Like, they might say, if I'm a listing agent, this buyer's agent is such a dummy. Like, he does not send over things until the last minute. He is hard to work with. He never answers his phone. Like, I don't need to tell my clients that. That serves no purpose at all. I'm the professional, so I need to make sure I'm getting the information, and my clients don't need to know that the other side might be a little bit difficult, or they don't need to know that the buyers, if they're the sellers, said something that the buyer's agent told you. You want to just make sure everyone is cool, calm, and collected and set the tone for a good transaction. I've always heard that, the moms, this is relevant. This is the last week my kids are home for this summer. But I've had to shush and shush and shush. But, a mom sets the tone for the house. If mama's in a bad mood, everybody's in a bad mood. Or if mom is stressed out, everybody's stressed out. You're the same in a transaction. If you are high stress, if you are looking for problems, if you say, this is so stressful, these people are so difficult, then that's what's going to happen. But if you approach things as, with your problem solving cap on and say, obviously issues are going to pop up, but I'm going to use my expertise and my knowledge to alleviate a situation. And I'm going to make sure we get to the closing table and we're not offended by every little thing that's done. You're really going to have a much easier transaction and less stress transaction. And also just know that there will be moments where your client might take something out on you that's not your fault. Just this past week, I just got back from the beach yesterday, and on Sunday or Monday, I actually got a house under contract. But before we got there, there was lots of back and forth. We were far off on the price, then we got closer, and then we got far away again. And we finally were so close. I was the buyer's agent to getting this worked out. And my buyers sent me a text. It was late at night. And it was not the nicest text in the world. It was kind of, rude. It was kind of aggressive. But I did not respond. Again, it was late at night. I did not respond. And then first thing that next morning, I woke up to an apology text. The client realized they like overstepped and they took some things out on me that were not my fault. But I know that, like, I accepted his apology. I said, you didn't even need to apologize. This is high stress situations, but you need to come from a place of just understanding that people might be a little stressed out, and understanding that if you can be a problem solver, not a problem maker, that you will find an easier situation, and you will also get to the point where you can end the transaction in a positive place, not in a negative place. So just, that's a good lesson for life, I think, in general, not just for real estate, but a lesson in life too. So does anyone have any questions? It is 10:59, so I kept my 1 hour promise, but does anyone have any questions or stories or concerns that they'd like to share? Okay, well, if not, I hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and feel free to send me an email if you would like copies of those things, and I will respond back and send them. But again, I appreciate everyone showing up and coming to class, and I'm here to help you if you need it.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome. Do I need to do anything for the record, or?
Don't know. I'm going to hit stop and we'll see what we get.